Sometimes I wish that I had an instruction manual for how to do church in pandemic purgatory times. I wish we had instruction manuals for how to deal with a North American church now firmly disestablished from the halls of power, such that no one outside the fold cares about our church's positions on abortion, more or less pro-choice, in case you were wondering, or climate change, or poverty, or refugee support. Sometimes I wish we had an instruction manual for how to deal with the fact that more young people today get their spiritual education from TikTok and Twitter than they do from Sunday school. It's easier to access, way more entertaining, and I can get it all in the comfort of my PJs. A friend of mine says that we need to stop thinking about the church in terms of instruction manuals and start thinking about the church as a kind of art installation, an immersive experience where time and space and you and other people there interact in a way that seems to point beyond time and space and you and the other people there. I loved that idea until I remembered that I stink at art. I'm not all that creative. The last painting I did was a paint by numbers I ordered from China off of TikTok. No creativity involved. The only thing that I have ever sewed together is a button on a shirt and 6 napkins that I copied step by step off of YouTube. I can sort of play the ukulele, but I need the chords off the internet. I like to keep it to 3 chords, if at all possible. And though they try to hide their disappointment, I can see it on my friends' faces when I fail to maintain tempo on Indigo Girls Closer to Fine. Creativity is absolutely what we need today in the church. It's just that I'm not sure that I am competent to bring it. And I'm not the only one. I've heard now from many pastors and elders and people in the pews who feel like amateurs precisely at the moment when what the church seems to need is expert guidance, expert direction, expert leadership. And I don't just mean experts who can help the church make budget. I mean experts who can help the church be salt and light to the world, who can figure out what levers we need to pull, what bolts we need to turn, what directions we need to follow in order to magnify Jesus' kind of healing and justice and inclusion for a world on a collision course with massive burnout, violent confrontation, and sinful inequality. Many of us have been looking for experts because while we might resonate with the church's message and mission to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God, we don't feel equipped to figure out how to make that message relevant to the world again. We don't feel equipped to integrate church into our own lives in a way that makes it as interesting or as meaningful as the soccer league down the street, the book group on the block, or the film on Netflix. We're the amateurs at the art installation asking if we really have much to contribute, standing off to the side thinking, that's someone else's job, isn't it? I'm just here to appreciate the art, not create it, to see what I can learn from the experts, not try to be one. Of course, Jesus isn't the type of art teacher who is interested in experts. Look at the disciples he chooses. They don't have degrees in theology or church leadership. They know how to fish, and even that seems debatable since most of the reports we get on their fishing aren't very good. Seriously, I'm assuming that the Word made flesh could have chosen people with PhDs in sharing his love with the world if he wanted to. He could have chosen the people who went to the Ivy League rabbinic schools of love. And yet he doesn't limit his recruiting to those kinds of people. A lot of people he recruits don't have much experience, aren't sure of what they are doing, aren't always confident in their beliefs or their practices. Jesus seems more interested in amateurs than experts, maybe because Jesus is always looking to do a new thing. like turning water to wine because he wants people to experience faith more like a party than a calculus class. No offense, math teachers. Or breaking the rules to heal somebody because if rules get in the way of healing, they need to be broken. Or raising someone from the dead to remind us to pay as much attention to our dreams for how life could be as we do to those voices always telling us what can't be done. And if you are looking to do a new thing, it makes sense that you wouldn't go to the experts. If you're trying to do a new thing, you don't always want to recruit people with a lot of experience, which is the word that expert derives from. You want people who are willing to try something outside of their experience, who aren't afraid to do a new thing, who are willing to jump into something driven more by their desire than by their competence. Which is a really frightening way to run a church. I mean, what if we assemble all of this creative energy, unleash it inside of our community, and it doesn't produce new members or new pledges or any of those markers of success? What if we let all that energy spill over into the world and it turns out not good enough to stop the warming of the planet, not wise enough to stop the country from tearing itself apart, not effective enough to bring more love and grace and hope to a world that seems dangerously close to running out of it? Or more personally, what if the love and grace and hope that I have to give isn't good enough to raise my own children without worry, sustain my closest relationships, keep me from spiraling into depression or irrelevance, much less impact the world? What if I don't have what it takes to live the life that I know Jesus wants from me, the life that I want to live? What if I'm not enough? Jesus doesn't seem worried about it. In this farewell discourse in John's gospel, he basically tells the disciples, I've taught you everything you need to know. I've given you everything that you need to do, even greater things that I have done. And as part of this final blessing and commissioning, he gives the disciples this command to love one another, all the while knowing, get this, knowing that they are going to mess it up. It's a short reading today, only 5 verses, but it's sandwiched between what are arguably the 2 biggest failures of disciples of Jesus in the entire New Testament. Before the command to love, we learn that Judas is going to betray him to his death. After the command to love, we learn not only that Peter will deny him, but in a remarkable show of poor self-understanding, he denies that he will deny him. Now, if you know anything about the disciples, these failures are not at all surprising. Most of the gospel writers have a pretty low view of the disciples. They're a bunch of discipleship amateurs. 90% of the time, they don't understand the way of Jesus. They don't understand the cross. They compete over titles and honors while Jesus is teaching them that none of that matters. They even stop children from coming to him, which is just stupid, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what disciples learn in Intro to Jesus 101? What's surprising in this text is not that the disciples failed to do the one thing that Jesus commands them to do, to love one another well. What is surprising is that Jesus already knows they are going to fail before he issues this command. He knows he's going to be betrayed by one of them, and he's still coaching them on love. He knows he's going to be denied, and he's still commanding them to love. It's almost like Jesus is commanding his disciples to love at the same time that he's communicating to them that he knows they are likely to fail at it. Which is really an odd thing to say at a time when people like me are feeling anxious about our own competency as people of faith. Bring your best loving self to the work, to the life, to the community, and no, it's probably not going to work out the way you want it to. Some of you are probably going to fail to live up to Jesus' call to discipleship. Some of you will stop believing in him. Some of you will deny your affiliation to his way with your words or your choices. Together, we are likely to mess up, make mistakes, some of them huge, and not be the people we want to be. Good luck whenever this pandemic finally ends. It's an odd thing to say unless Jesus is preaching to a bunch of disciples who are so anxious to get discipleship right the first time that they don't allow themselves to risk the disappointment that could come if you lived as if God was making all things new. Which is the real issue for the church today, trusting that the way of Jesus really does lead to life in a way that gives us all the chutzpah to love fearlessly, to live courageously, born out of our desire to participate in the world that Jesus is creating, not held hostage by our lack of competence to make it so. How easy it is for us to forget how much joy can be found in that kind of fearless living. I forget it all the time. Just this other day, I had to make a phone call to a guy to ask him to do like 3 more things on this campaign to address the vacant houses issue in Baltimore. We had been working so hard, and none more than him, organizing community leaders and politicians and business leaders and philanthropists to come together. And I had to call him to ask him to do yet another thing. I was feeling badly about it. And so, in typical pastor jiu-jitsu, I prefaced my ask with an extraordinary amount of flattery. Thank you so much. You're incredible, a miracle worker. You walk on water. And could I just ask you to do 3 more things? And he surprised me when he said, Andrew, I don't think you get it. I love this work. You couldn't pay me to stay away. This is what church is supposed to be like for everybody. The place in that well-worn quote where your heart's deep hunger meets the world's great need. It's just that in order to make the church that kind of place, I think we have to know up front that we're going to fail some of the time. You have to know that up front, because the only way to get to that intersecting place where desire meets loving service is to free yourself of the idea that Jesus demands perfection or omnicompetence from people closest to him. To be willing to fail, knowing that grace is always waiting for you there. The word amateur, after all, just means lover. It means somebody who does something because they love it, not because they're paid for it or required to do it or guilted into it, simply because they love it. The irony is that Jesus commands his disciples to do the one thing that would bring them the greatest joy if they practiced it together without too much self-consciousness, without too much fear. As we continue to struggle together through this pandemic, I hope we can find that joy together. There's no instruction manual for how to find it. It's an art installation, after all. You have to risk your best creativity, even if you don't feel like you are competent in what you bring. You could even fail. Luckily for us, Jesus doesn't seem worried about it. He's in the business of making all things new.